Alright, welcome back to my channel. On the wall behind me is a representation, I should say, of my study of the Book of Ether, which was an absolutely marvellous journey. And I kind of wrote down the family tree, the line, Ether's line, back up to Jared and the brother of Jared. I've annotated it with notes of important events and things that happen. So basically I love to be on Instagram, and I love to use the Instagram stories section, and there with my close friends, who I've chosen a lot of church members who are my friends, I like to share church stuff, and of course they're just very short little snippets, but we've had some good conversation and feedback. So this video is kind of like an expansion of that Instagram story feed that I like to do. So the Book of Ether is the record of the Jaredite nation, and it all started with the Tower of Babel. And this is a well-known account given in the book of Genesis, and this comes not long after the global flood, where Noah and his family were the only survivors of that. So the Tower of Babel, which was built in Babylon, in a place called Shinar, which is modern day Iraq. Okay, it was around 2300 to 2200 BC. Okay, we're not sure exactly how long they were building this tower, but it was the Babylonian people who were trying to build a tower whose top would reach to heaven. Okay, whether they really imagined they could reach heaven and be where God is, we are not sure. Whether they were boasting that they were going to build the greatest, biggest, highest tower in the land, perhaps. We know that they worshipped the god which they called Bel or Baal, which sounds very similar to Babel, and another word is Balal, which means to confuse. And of course this was the location where God confused the languages of the people to stop their work of building the tower, as they basically couldn't understand each other, and so the construction was halted at that time. I think it's to do with pride. They thought they were greater than the one true God. They could build a tower to reach heaven, to reach God. So I think a lot of it had to do with pride. So Baal was the sun god whom the Babylonians worshipped, and his temple was probably the model for the Tower of Babel that they were building. So, I mean, I've made some notes here because there's no way I can remember everything that I want to say. But it's interesting to note also, aside from the Jaredites, which we got here, in 587 BC, it was also the Babylonians, people of Babylon, who conquered Judah and Jerusalem, forcing the sole heir to David's throne, Mulek, the son of Zedekiah, to flee. And this is the group of people who sailed across the seas to the ancient Americas and who became known as the Mulekites. So it's interesting the role that Babylon and the Babylonians played with that group of people too. So let's get to it, shall we? The Book of Ether. I tell you what, it was an absolutely fantastic read. I mean, as with everything in the Book of Mormon, I've read it countless times in my life. But this time reading it through, I don't know, it was different somehow. Previously, you start reading the Book of Ether and it's like, okay, there's one king, then there's another king, and then they fight, and then there's another king, and they fight, and it just goes on and on and on. And it can seem a bit boring and a bit irrelevant, and it can seem very unscriptural at times, because all you get is wars and bloodshed. But yeah, that's part of it, but this time reading it through, it was somehow different. Before I get into some of the highlights, I want to read a couple of scriptures to you about the record of these people, right? So King Limhi, who lived in the land of Nephi, right, in the days of Mosiah, King Limhi said regarding the Jaredite plates, and I want to read this directly from the record, because he sent people to try to find the land of Zarahemla, but they missed it, and instead they found a land that had been destroyed and a people who had been destroyed, and they found these 24 plates as a witness. And so King Limhi said, I am desirous that these records, the Jaredite records, should be translated into our language, for perhaps they will give us a knowledge of a remnant of the people who have been destroyed, from whence these records came, or perhaps they will give us a knowledge of this very people who have been destroyed, and I am desirous to know the cause of their destruction. So this was really intriguing to King Limhi, and he imagined that there would be great value in knowing about why they found this land that had evidence of being peopled, but it was completely destroyed, and he wanted to know why. And he continues a little bit more. That was in Mosiah chapter 8, verse 12. And then he continues in verse 19, when Ammon teaches him that there is a seer who can translate. So it says in verse 19, the king rejoiced exceedingly and gave thanks to God, saying, doubtless a great mystery is contained within these plates, and these interpreters were doubtless prepared for the purpose of unfolding all such mysteries to the children of men. So King Limhi felt that this record was going to be highly important to him and his people. And then a little later on in the book of Mosiah, we have Mormon, one of the last prophets of the Book of Mormon. And while he was abridging the book of Mosiah, often you'll see that he inserted his own comments as he commented on the text, right? And so he inserted some comments of his own regarding this Jaredite record, or about the Book of Ether. And this is what Mormon said about it. It's in Mosiah chapter 28 and verse 19. And Mormon said, it is expedient, means absolutely necessary, that all people, right, includes me and you, should know the things which are written in this account. So he said, it is expedient that all people should know the things which are written in this account. This account meaning the 24 plates of the Jaredite record. So what is it then that is so absolutely necessary for us to know about the Book of Ether and these people? What do we know about them? We know that they came from the Middle East, from modern day Iraq, at the Tower of Babel. What we don't know is how much of the gospel of Jesus Christ they had with them and they brought with them. This is pre-Abrahamic era, so it's before the covenants that God made with Abraham and refreshed them through Isaac and Jacob, who became known as Israel. So it's right after the flood of Noah, when entire mankind was wiped out. So we don't know how much of the gospel they had, how much of priesthood authority they had at that time, how much of prophets were around at that time. We don't know how much of the gospel ordinances and covenants they had. But what we do know is that the brother of Jared, and we know that his name is Mahonri Moriankuma, and this comes from an account of Joseph Smith when he went to, I might get this wrong. I mean, I read it a few weeks ago. I think he went to give a name and a blessing to someone who had a child, and they asked if he would name the child for them, and he named it Mahonri Moriankuma. And he said that this is because the Lord had recently revealed to him this was the name of the brother of Jared, because it's not mentioned in the scriptures, right? But what it is mentioned is that they called a place where they rested Moriankuma, and in these times they would usually call that after the people who founded it. So anyway, Mahonri Moriankima, the brother of Jared. Fascinating, isn't it? Where was I? Kind of losing track. So yeah, they came from, that's right, we don't know how much of the gospel and ordinances and covenants they had, but we do know that Mahonri Moriankima was a righteous and holy man. He knew how to petition God in prayer, and he knew how to receive personal revelation through God. And it was so powerful that we read in the account of Ether that he even saw the finger of the Lord, right? And because his faith was so great that the Lord Jesus Christ showed himself to Mahonri Moriankima in his spirit form, because this was thousands of years before Jesus was born and received his physical body. So he showed himself in his spirit form. A few generations later, we come to Ema, and it is noted in the record that Ema also saw the Son of Righteousness. So he also saw Jesus Christ in his spirit form. Very interesting. And that came in an era of great prosperity. So we are not sure of these certain things, even though we know that Moriankima was a good and holy and just man before God. We also don't know if they brought any records with them, what kind of records there would have been at that time, if Noah had any records on the ark, and if this particular group of people from Babel brought any records with them. The Mulekites, many thousand and a half years later, they did not take any records with them to the ancient Americas, and over a relatively short period of 400 years, when King Mosiah discovered these people, he couldn't understand their language. Their language had changed, had become corrupted. They completely didn't believe in a God, in a creator. So their faith and religion and language had completely been turned upside down because they didn't have any scriptural records with them. And we don't know if these guys had any scriptural records with them either, though they may have done, because we have the famous account of Achish, right? And the daughter of Jared, who mentioned to him about secret combinations, right? And she remembered it was written about secret combinations of their fathers of old, of long ago. And that becomes one of the main features throughout the Book of Ether, is secret combinations, which is basically people conspiring together to gain power. So that could be done by murder, it could be done by intrigue, it can be done through war, it can be done many ways, but basically it's people who conspire together to cover up for each other their lies, their sins, and their crimes. And this is a large feature of the Book of Ether. The first mention we get of it is with Achish, who I just mentioned previously, and he turned to these secret combinations of old to try and kill Omer, because Omer's son Jared wanted the kingdom and he wanted power. And there's a few times that we read in the record that that sons were looking to kill their fathers so they could obtain the power of the kingdom. Fascinating, isn't it? Terrible, but fascinating. And as I thought about that, how that can relate to me today, why is this necessary for us today? And I thought, and this is just my opinion, and I thought that it's far easier to commit sins and to commit crimes and get away with it when you're in a position of power, compared to if you are just an ordinary citizen. And that can be the same with political leaders today. I'm not suggesting that every political leader is bad, but it's so much more easy for them to get away with crimes and sins when they're in that position of power. And that, I think, was a motivation for the people of the Jaredites, why they were so desperate for power. We learn of one of them, I think it was Replikish. He lived 42 years as the king of the land, and he was living lavishly. He was building all this stuff. He was taxing the people heavily and using their money to build himself palaces, and he was involving himself in sexual encounters with women, with prostitutes, whoredoms, you name it, he did it at the people's money. And after 42 years, the people had finally had enough, and they revolted, and he lost the kingdom. But yeah, it was easy for him to do that once he was in power. So that is a theme. There's so many fascinating and intriguing things that go on, battles, and I love King Shule, S-H-U-L-E. He had a number of difficulties. He was, I think he was the youngest son of Kib, and Kib gave him the kingdom, and he turned out to be a good guy, and he had many difficulties with his brother Korihor and his children. It's fascinating. But secret combinations is the key here. So it started with Achish. A few generations later, it came again with King Heth. And then finally down here in the days of Com, Shiblom, pretty much to the end, to the prophet Ether, there were secret combinations of murder and power and wickedness, polluting the lifestyle and the culture of these people. So there is a pattern. I'm not sure how much you can see on this video of the poster here, but there is a pattern that the people live in prosperity. And then after a while, it could be a generation, a couple of generations, 3 generations, secret combinations make an entrance. People turn to wickedness because Satan is real and he has power and he wants to destroy you and make you miserable in these days as well as today, right? Okay, we had a little problem there. My camera fell off the tripod. But yes, we were talking about the cycle of prosperity. People turn into wickedness. We then have prophets appearing in the land, giving prophetic warnings to the people. After these prophetic warnings, there came famine. Sometimes there came war, bloodshed, pestilence, which means disease, rather like we are going through with the COVID-19 in these days. That is another pestilence. Okay, and there was great destruction among the people. And it's interesting, so this cycle repeats itself throughout the generations, throughout Jaredite life. Okay, and it was interesting with Achish. He had many sons, and he became jealous of one of his sons and locked him up in prison and fed him very little food and water until he died. And another one of his sons became really angry with that and left the land. And then finally his sons were trying to gain the support of the people, and Achish didn't like that, and they engaged in this years-long war that left only 30 people in the kingdom of Achish alive. So, I mean, I found that really fascinating. But yeah, there's so many great things. And of course, as we come to the end of Jaredite life, Ether. So we're following the line of Ether, right? So Ether's line goes up to Jared, okay? So we're following the line of Ether. And it's interesting because in Ether's day, there is King Coriantumr, and he is a descendant of Mahonri Moriankumr. So it all comes back to him again. And Coriantumr is this guy that has all these great battles with Shared, with Gilead, with Lib, with Shiz. And we remember the absolutely intriguing end time where millions of the Jaredites are slain in mortal combat, and where we have Coriantumr and Shiz and they're both like half dead, and then Coriantumr slices off Shiz's head, right? And then Shiz kind of picks himself up on his arm, struggles, and then dies, and Coriantumr collapses as though he's dead. And we have Ether, God's prophet, who is there to witness the entire destruction, except Coriantumr, of course, of the Jaredite people. And Ether seals up the record, finishes it off, and hides it in a manner that hundreds of years later the people of King Limhi could find it. So it's an absolutely fascinating book of scripture. And if you give it a chance, and if you read through it, there are so many lessons to be learned. We have the pride cycle. Okay, the pride cycle is prevalent also throughout the Book of Mormon, the Nephite records. And we see it happening again today, right? We have had times of great prosperity. We have had prophets warning us, and especially now so, since President Nelson became the prophet, we've had many prophetic warnings from President Nelson. And if they continue to go unheeded, we're going to see destruction come. And we're living in these fascinating times because we are getting close to the return of the Saviour Jesus Christ for his second coming. That's another topic that I absolutely love and that I have addressed before and I will address again. But we have prophets in the land today, just like the Jaredites had. And we have warnings from prophets to prepare ourselves. And it's up to us if we're going to follow them or not. That is my overview of the Book of Ether. I just love making family trees and timelines. It just helps me to be able to, get it all set in my brain and figure it out, and get a deeper understanding. But it's provided me, I spent 2 or 3 weeks pouring through the Book of Ether and making all this family tree and adding all these notes of interesting things that happen. It's just absolutely fascinating. That's what I want to share with you guys today. The Book of Ether, described by both King Limhi and Mormon as something essentially necessary for all people to know. Secret combinations, they're alive and well today, and we have to do everything we can to fight against them. That's the message. That is the Book of Ether and the Jaredites. Thank you very much for listening. If you've made it this far, congratulations. I tried to keep the video short, but then I kind of, get into it. And I just love the scriptures. I love the scriptures so much. Thanks very much, guys. Have a good one.